short story by Demonic Death Judge, read by Tony Raukula. When you hear this sound, play the next track. He felt cold. The fire provided enough light to see his fingertips pressed against the freezing strings, but not much more. Why the fuck was he sitting there? He didn't even like the outdoors. Yet for some unexplainable reason, he decided to go cowboy, which meant a half-assed attempt to recreate the cover photo of the first Eagles album, without the Eagles, or the desert, and alone. At least the whiskey was working. Something had drawn his attention to an old photo of his Uncle Jack that had been gathering dust on his bookshelf. This must have been from before Jack got sober, because you could spot the red on his cheekbones from behind the bushy beard. Jack was never a mean drunk. Most of the time, he would mind his own business with the exception of the occasional dad joke at the perfect moment. He was always a part of the family except for the last few years. Sobering up didn't suit him. He disappeared for months, and no one knew where he was, or even if he was alive. The last conversations he had had with Jack had been complete cipher. Somehow they revolved around campfires, though. Maybe that was it. Or maybe it was a tequila sunrise playing in his head for the last 2 weeks. Whatever the reason, there he was, freezing his ass off, and the metal flask was almost empty. For the untrained eye, he was a great guy. The sort of guy who you would actually want to spend time with. He was a storyteller, a natural protagonist, the one you rooted for in movies. Those who knew him better knew that he would reveal his true nature as the night progressed. It depended on whether he managed to find a place to go spend his night, soil his royal oats before the Jews made Mr. Hyde pop out. He loathed himself, but he never admitted it to anyone, not even himself. He'd get by, avoiding reflecting surfaces, but he knew that women liked him, at least up to a certain standard he had perfected along the years. He found the older women, the vultures and the cougars, a better package to manage. They were proud enough to refuse him from paying for their drinks, and married enough to spend the night at a decent hotel where they knew they would never see their cheapskate husbands. Either he let them get him, or he would pick the first new face in the bar and pick a fight. He was filth, crawling in the gutters, dripping sin. Each day he woke up to a splitting headache and a residue of a moral jackhammer, which had diminished gradually through the years, but could still remind him of times when he used to question his acts. And each night he would repeat the pattern all over again. As the sun rose to wake him, he felt his mind grow darker. He was home. He recognized the bloodstains on the sheets from a broken nose he had a few months back. The previous night had been a dull one, or at least that is what his swollen knuckles suggested. They'd hit human tissue, for at least they weren't broken, as they were when he hit the brick wall beside the slot machine. The only question was whether he hit someone significant or not. Significant in whether he was banned from the fine establishment of alcohol consumption. He felt it worse this morning than in a long time. It was banging in the back of his head, as if Jose Canseco was trying to break a cork bat in half against it. But his head wouldn't break off and fly into the crowd. It stayed there, destined to kill him slowly from the inside. This was why his family line was filled with boozers. Not because of misfortune or poverty or mental illness. It was the threshold, or the lack of it, for enduring pain that caused it. You simply had to self-medicate if you wanted the pain to go away. At least he was the last of the line. All of his relatives were gone years ago, and he'd sworn to himself that he would never continue the bloodline. He swore that whatever happens, he would not end up like his old man. With the last breath that I have left, he said, looking at his dry tobacco-stained fingertips in disgust, I doom you to hell. The first thing he wanted to check as he walked inside was the look on the owner's face, but luckily she wasn't there. For a split second, he worried if his knuckles had hit her, but that was the line he knew he would never cross, no matter how drunk. It was busier than normal for a Wednesday evening, and it wasn't even 6 o'clock yet. More than half of the tables were already seated, and he could tell from the amount of wet rings on the dark wood that these were not their first rounds. He ordered the house ale, cheapest on tap, and a shot of Ferret Branca to calm the whirling vortex inside. He downed the shot and took his pint with him to the slot machine. This was the best place to survey the room for potential, with a clear view to each table except the sofa next to the toilets. Nothing pleased his eye yet, so he devoted his full attention to the one-armed bandit. Five pints later, he realized that the house was full. It seemed like a busload of out-of-town engineer types had invaded his home. There was nothing wrong with engineers, but there was definitely something wrong with the male-to-female ratio inside the bar. The frustration began to set in, and the engineers began to transform from creators and innovators into obnoxious intimidators. He felt it best to fight the urge to fight by means of infiltration. The empty glasses piled up on the large wooden table like tissues on the floor beside the toilet sink. At first they were having fun. Laughter and loud gestures turned jealous heads all over the bar, wishing they were part of the shenanigans. The shenanigans, however, did not impress one of the patrons at his table. This man could see through the bullshit and the friendly gestures and began to find all the best places to poke at. The sweet spots that would eventually drive anyone mad. The master manipulator pitted against his own kind. It was inevitable that it would turn up messy. The initial blow of the half-empty glass was distracted by the sugary cider hitting his eyes. He had no time to react before the second blow hit him from the side. That one he fell. Someone at the table had managed to hit him straight on his ear. The loud bang was followed by the muffled sound of people yelling and punches landing all over his body. He was overpowered, and for a while it seemed as if it was all over for him, that he would finally have an excuse to give up and let go. As the blood gushed from his nose and mixed with the hooch on the floor like a river turning into sea, he saw boots swinging at him, table and chair legs spread across the floor like a forest, gym bags lying in heaps that seemed to resemble mountains in the horizon. He swore he spotted some lifelike figure gazing at him on one of those heaps, as if standing on a cliff far away in the distance. He was not only losing the fight, he was losing it. Someone grabbed his collar from behind and began to drag him across the floor. He felt his shirt pressing his throat. He couldn't breathe. When the floor changed into snow, he was disappointed, because if it were the tiling on the bathroom floor, it would have finally ended for him. He struggled to lift his head up, and he could see that they were dragging him towards the drop in the woods. Just as his eyes went over the edge of the drop, he saw the figure he thought he saw on the cliffs of Nike again. But this time, he could make out the shape of a mountain lion. The beast looked straight into his eyes and whispered to him, as if the sound was closer than it could possibly be. "There's no burden to carry anymore." He felt his head hit something hard on the ground, and everything was pitch black. Flashes. Infinite flashes. One would assume a kaleidoscope-like symphony of color, but there was only black and white in flashes. Have you ever stared at headlights for a longer period? It leaves a residue of light in your eyes that follows your gaze everywhere. Now imagine that light flashing in steady, rapid intervals. That's what it felt like. At least, the closest equivalent to it. However, the sound was what got to you. Something between a saxophone, a scream, a chant, or a song. A blend of them all heard through a giant empty concrete mixer, echoing from impossible directions. Underneath it all, a constant sweaty beating of drums, a rhythm that could have been played by a coked-up Brazilian at a village jamboree somewhere on the Congo River banks. It was something straight out of Apocalypse Now. The final drop of acid Lance took before the Dolong Bridge. It felt like it went on for hours, and in time, the flashes began to shape as if they were representations of harrowing sounds. At first, they were random images of screaming mouths, of throats twitching like jackhammers. In a while, they morphed into drops, splashing into a pool of white, snowflake-like crystals and patterns forming on the surface of that pool, cracking like ice, falling into infinity and beyond, only to start over like a never-ending loop, until the loop began to break into the shape of a mountain lion, the same one from before, majestic and terrifying. The flashes began to pace down, shifting between the beast and something more familiar, a familiar face, a face with colored cheekbones and a bushy beard. It was Uncle Jack. He woke up and the snow had melted. Why the fuck was he sitting there? Jack put more wood into the fire, which made a startling sound. "Shit," Jack said. "I think the can just exploded. There goes your breakfast." He could smell the baked beans boiling and burning against the red-hot coals. He felt like Blondie, dried up and completely exhausted, watching Tuco boil some potatoes in hope for information on that name on the gravestone. What was it? Archie... what? Bunker? No, that's the fat fuck from the reruns. Stanton. Who? Archie Stanton. Sad Hill, you know. Yeah. You ain't finding no gold here, though. Only nooses. I thought you were dead. Nice train of thought there, buddy. Where the fuck are we? What's it look like, huh? It sure as shit ain't Sad Hill. It was pitch black already, a couple of steps away from the fire. The ground was sand, but it was hard. That and the fact that he couldn't hear waves suggested that they were inland. The Eagles record returned to his mind, So he checked the sky for any soaring birds, but he could only see stars brighter than ever. It was something else. Jack noticed him staring at the sky. Like it? Yeah. I never gotten used to that, ever. That there? That's where I ought to be. Shame I've been smashed all those years. Never saw it clear enough. It's like looking at a city out of plane at night. All those lights heading downtown, you know. Heading downtown, huh? How would you know? No one's seen you in ages. I bet you haven't seen a city in years. Where exactly did you go? Jack began to laugh at him like he was supposed to know something. Something obvious, but which he couldn't grasp. Right here. I've been right here. Guess you've had more than your fair share of the hooch for asking that. Don't even start on giving me the lecture bullshit, please. I accept being a drunk. So did I. Well, that I do believe. Wanna know why? Because you liked it? No, because it was easy. Because it was proving the boozing, you know? Because I wanted to shut my head up. Well, I'm not that. Jack packed a blanket in a satchel and threw a canteen on the ground for him. It took a while for his eyes to get accustomed to the darkness. Thankfully, all he needed to do was follow Jack, who seemed to have a cat-like vision, warning him of rocks and roots on the trail. When he finally began to make out the surroundings, he saw that time had not been kind to this place, as if a swarm of insects had run over the land, eating and infecting every living thing, and leaving behind nothing but rock. Piles of rock intertwined with plains of sand. The starry sky casted shadows on the ground. They seemed to move unnaturally fast in weird directions. They mesmerized him. The landscape changed only in shape, depending on whether it was uphill or downhill. He had no clue of where they were heading, and Jack wouldn't tell him. They must have walked for hours when it hit him. It wasn't getting any lighter. Yet Jack was talking at breakfast. And the weirdest thing was that he didn't feel exhausted by the walk. There was nothing around them except the bare terrain as far as the eye could see. His mind began to wander. He started to think of all the women he'd been with in the past years, trying to remember their names or even their faces. First he saw them smiling, laughing to his jokes, looking intensely into his eyes. But he soon realized these smiles had turned into tired, drunk faces with signs of torn blood vessels under the surface of their skins. They reeked of some cheap Chanel copy, cigarettes and alcohol. The yellow teeth contrasted with the purple eyeshadow and created a combination of dread and sorrow. The more he thought of the women, the more he saw things clearly. It made him sick. It gave him a headache that forced him to push his head down against his hand so he could rub his eyes. It felt like a blind man losing sight, but it helped. When he opened his eyes, he noticed that he could only hear his own footsteps. He looked up and he was following a cougar. The large cat looked like something out of a BBC documentary, walking in slow motion, keeping its tail down. He was leading the two-strong pack with determination that he'd never known. He trusted the creature, which was odd considering the circumstances. He'd lost track of time, wandering in that endless desert, letting himself to be led down a trail unknown. He began to accept that he'd never see home again. He began to realize what Jack meant with being here the whole time. He'd be on this trail for eternity. So, you're getting a grasp on all of this? The cat kept its eye on the trail, Jack's voice was soft and silent, nearly whispering inside his ear. I doubt it. I'm in the middle of the fucking desert, talking to a goddamn cougar. Exactly. At least you're talking. Your old man didn't say a fucking word to me. My old man? Yeah. He was here when I got here, full of hate. But he needed time. The time he had, Jesus fuck. Ain't nothing but time here. Imagine him walking for an eternity. Oh, we didn't walk. We had to tend to the corn. Corn? You gotta be fucking kidding me. Nothing could ever grow here. Yeah, that's what your old man said for ages. But it grew alright. There was more corn than he could ever pop. You see, he figured it out all by himself. It don't matter if the soil is fucked. It don't matter if it's swamp or dirt or grass or some goddamn landfill. It'll grow alright. And all you need to do is care for it. That's all. Good old-fashioned love and care. And those cops were everywhere. Love. That bastard knew nothing of love. He'd get drunk, beat the kids, no fuck around. Great fucking role model. The more he thought of his father, the more he got angry. The more he got angry, the more his hand reached for his flask. There was nothing in his pockets. Nothing to take a warming sip from. You ain't gonna find any. That figure. You ain't gonna find any women either. What? You heard me. You can't be like your old man here. Then it hit him. He was his old man. He'd become what he always swore not to. He'd figured that as long as he doesn't make commitments, as long as there's no marriage and kids, he'd never be able to hurt them. The shadows on the ground stopped. He looked around him and saw the stars slowly moving, taking the shape of faces. They were that of his father, his mother, and himself. He closed his eyes and began to see flashes of his past year. The fights at the bar, the nights with the women, his fists hitting faces of unknown people, and those faces turning into his own. Fists turning into belt buckles. Moaning turning into crying. The further they walked, the harder it became for him to control his thoughts. He couldn't handle it anymore. He fell on the ground, exhausted. The trail had taken him. He woke up to a gentle slap on the cheek. It was the owner telling him that the last call came a long time ago. There was drool on his cheek, and $20 and a note on his hand. This should be enough for the cab home. I think you'll figure it out there, so no need to walk anymore. Jack. The piece of paper smelled like smoke. He got a cab from outside the joint. It was snowing so heavily that his eyebrows turned completely wet when the heat of the cab melted the snow off of them. He took the metal flask from his jacket pocket and looked at it. It had something black on it. It looked like a drawing made with charcoal. He looked closer at it and recognized what it was. A mountain lion. He rolled down the window and threw the flask into the snow. Sons of Eagle. Cradled by the ocean storms. Days of prime. Long gone by now. And never to be regained.